ranchers with Alpha-Gal. He says more than 200 farmers from 28 states responded, the majority from Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, where the Lone Star tick is common.
69% of the respondents said that they had to modify work tasks associated to farming and ranching due to the diagnosis.
And he says the preliminary results show that 78% reported that their diagnosis was causing them to feel distressed and worry about the productivity of their farm or ranch.
The idea of like a person shuttering down a farm that's been in their family for generations because of this new diagnosis, I can only imagine what that really does feel like.
Rancher Kelly Decker raises beef cattle and sheep in north central Oklahoma with her husband and says she really struggled when first diagnosed in 2019. She considers herself lucky because her reactions are manageable, as long as she doesn't eat red meat and is careful around their livestock. But she knows of producers with Alpha-Gal who've had to leave farming.
My heart breaks for the people who have had to deal with that and have had to go through losing part of their identity from this allergy.
Decker says when that happens, the already small community of livestock producers gets even smaller. So she wants to see livestock and farming groups bring more attention to Alpha-Gal so that producers can navigate this growing issue. For NPR News, I'm Rebecca Smith in Missouri.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Layla Fadel.
It is 6:50. You're listening to Morning Edition on WNYC. Good morning. Marketplace Morning Report is next, and then later on Morning Edition, the war in Iran is roiling jet fuel prices. Now airlines are beginning to pass that cost along to consumers with higher ticket prices, even for travelers far from the Middle East. We'll talk through what to know if you're booking a flight and booking one soon. That's in about 15 minutes right here on WNYC. Falling temperatures through the day. We're at 54 now with clouds. Rain by mid-afternoon, then rain and snow likely. No accumulation. Patchy fog this morning. Temperature falling, as we said, to the low 40s by late afternoon. Feeling much colder than that with those high winds. This is WNYC.
WNYC supporters include the Cultural Center of the Lycée Français de New York. This year, the Francophonie concert celebrates the music of the Indian Ocean, March 19th. Tickets at culturalcenter.lfny.org.
A new HBO documentary series depicts conflicts between neighbors. Think makeshift backyard zoos and what are acceptable Halloween decorations. On the next All of It, we'll speak with the creators of Neighbors, and we want to hear your stories. I'm Allison Stewart. Join us for All of It, weekdays at noon on WNYC.
More tariffs are in the pipeline.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Progressive Insurance with Snapshot. Learn more about Snapshot at Progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Snapshot not available in California or from all agents. And by Bitwarden Password Manager, helping to extend spring cleaning to online security. Bitwarden is used to manage unique passwords and secure logins across all devices. Bitwarden.com.
From Marketplace, I'm Sabri Benishore, in for David Brancaccio. On top of everything, the trade war simmers on. Yesterday, the U.S. Trade Representative announced an investigation that could result in a whole new round of import taxes. Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer has more.
The Trump administration is investigating more than a dozen countries, including China, Vietnam, India, and the European Union, using Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. The U.S. Trade Representative's office will be looking into whether these countries are producing too much, flooding the U.S. with cheap products, and making it hard for American companies to compete. But unlike the tariffs struck down by the Supreme Court last month, Section 301 levies can't be imposed right away. First, there has to be an investigation, public comment period, and a hearing scheduled for May. The Trump administration wants the Section 301 tariffs to replace a temporary 10% import tax President Trump imposed last month, which is due to expire in July. I'm Nancy Marshall-Genzer for Marketplace.
The Federal Reserve is meeting this coming week to figure out what to do with interest rates in this country. Interest rates are how the Fed manages two problems in the economy: unemployment and inflation. And the tricky thing is, it cannot fight both at the same time. Higher interest rates fight inflation, but are bad for jobs. Lower interest rates are good for jobs, but bad for inflation. So it's got to pick. And the war in the Middle East is making that a whole lot harder to do. Marketplace's Justin Ho has that.
It's a pretty safe bet that the Fed is keeping an eye on the war in Iran and its effect on energy prices, says Menzi Chen, an economics professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
I think they will be eager to make sure that they show commitment to not let inflation get out of hand.
Chen says the Fed usually focuses on core inflation, which strips out energy prices, since they can jump around month to month. But he says the Fed is also going to consider scenarios where the conflict drags on, keeping energy prices high for a while.
And if it's sustained, then that's going to feed into core prices eventually.
That's because the cost of energy can affect prices throughout the economy.
You think of something like airfares, which are in quote unquote core inflation, but a really important piece of the cost structure for airlines is their fuel.
Claudia Sahm is chief economist at New Century Advisors. Higher inflation could cause the Fed to eventually raise interest rates. But Sahm says the Fed will also consider what could happen if energy costs rise so high that the economy slows down.
That's a scenario in which the Fed would be stepping in, potentially cutting rates, even though those energy prices are higher, because it's starting to create unemployment and, wreck growth.
Sahm says all the Fed can do at this point is gather as much data as it can and prepare for any of these outcomes. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
All right, let's do the numbers. The price of Brent crude is up at almost about $96 a barrel. Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ futures are all down in the 4 to 0.5% range.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Amazon Business, committed to business buying solutions to empower leaders to streamline and focus on growth. Learn more about smart business buying at amazonbusiness.com. And by Barron's Investor Circle, offering stock picks, market insights, and access to the Barron's editors behind a century of reporting at barrons.com/investor circle.
This week we got inflation numbers for February. Grocery prices rose 0.4% that month. That was before the war drove up oil prices and threatened the global supply of fertilizer. There have been periodic calls to control prices at the supermarket, even proposals to cap prices. Economists in general do not like that. So let's get into it. David Ortega is a professor at Michigan State University. Good morning.
Good morning, Sabri.
Whether it is government-mandated control over prices or some sort of arrangement for grocers to reduce their own prices, economists are not usually thrilled with the idea of price controls, to put it mildly. Why is that?
Well, it's because you're really tampering with the market mechanism, and it can lead to unintended consequences, things like shortages and sort of misallocation of resources. So when you have prices that are capped below the market clearing levels, producers have less incentive to supply those goods. And so they may shift to some of the uncapped alternatives, so to speak. You also end up with quality issues. It's also a bit of a sort of blunt targeting. These caps don't distinguish between price increases from, say, things like corporate profiteering or shocks that have sort of affected the market. And so a cap really penalizes both of those equally.
Is there an argument for temporary price controls? Yes, you'll have negative consequences, but maybe it's worth it for people to get a break on food prices for like a short period of time.
So it's just a temporary Band-Aid that can actually end up doing a lot more harm than good. So I think in order to get food price inflation under control, we have to sort of address the root cause of the issue. You know, what's happening with supply chains and the shocks and input prices, and also looking at sort of the demand side. But, you know, right now we're in a sort of period where there's tremendous uncertainty, not just in the food industry, but in the economy more generally. And that uncertainty in and of itself can be inflationary because it increases transaction costs as companies try to stay on top of an ever-changing economic environment.
Are there specific things the government can do when there's a shortage of something or a supply chain disruption? I mean, can they take specific actions to bring more or cheaper food or commodities in?
So I think, you know, the actions that help here are those that address the root cause. Investing in supply chain resilience and agricultural research and development. You know, these are investments that have to be made now because it takes years for them to pay off. And this is how we can keep productivity up in the agricultural and food sector that will ultimately keep prices, you know, from increasing like we saw a few years ago. We need the best science, the best technology to be able to meet current and future challenges.
Dr. David Ortega, professor in food economics and policy at Michigan State University. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sabri.
In New York, I'm Sabri Benishore with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.